Stop trying to figure out your avoidant ex. So this is a Reddit post that we're going to go through today. I want to break it down a little bit, bring out some important points, and see what value I can add, having gone through disorganized attachment myself, which means I basically dealt with the anxious and the avoidant. I now coach people through this, and I help them get to a more secure place in a way shorter time. So let's get straight into it. Their attachment style doesn't matter. I'm going to stop right there. So I think I can imagine what this person means is trying to dig into why they are the way they are, and focusing on them is not going to help you move forward. Yes, but it is very important to try and understand an avoidant and the reasons they do things, because very often if you're anxious or you're disorganized, you'll have a tendency to blame yourself for why the relationship didn't work or why certain things happened. The importance about why an avoidant does things the way they do is not to try and help them or fix them or anything like that, but it's really to help you understand and see that there is a block in the relationship. There is a wall. There is something happening that is stopping it from proceeding into a more healthy relationship, and it is not you. Yes, there are things you might have to work on, especially if you're anxious or disorganized. But no matter how much you work on something, if the other person is not aware of their own things and they're not willing and wanting and able to work on them, and then they're not putting in actionable steps to do so, then that wall is going to remain. And it's important to understand that parts of healthy relationships, such as healthy communication, vulnerability, are big struggles for avoidance. So yes, their attachment style does matter. Understanding it does matter so that you can stop blaming yourself for it and realize that if you want a healthy relationship, it's not going to be with somebody who struggles with avoidant attachment and is not willing or wanting to work on it. So let's keep reading. No answer as to why the breakup happened or what you could have done differently will ever be satisfactory. Why? Now, this is really important. Why will those answers not be satisfactory? And this is true. We often get left with these questions about the relationship. Why did they leave? Why don't you like me? You know, what was wrong with us or the relationship or me, and things like that. No matter if we get an answer or not, that's not going to help us get any type of closure. And closure is the thing I really want to touch on for this point. What we do need and want after a relationship is that closure factor. Now, how do we actually get it? If we're not going to get the closure from getting these answers, because if you think about it, whether we get the answer or not, we're not really going to be okay with that. And you can think back to any relationship you've had before. Number one, the other person might not give you an answer at all. Number two, it might be an answer that's almost made up or done to sort of save your feelings. And number three, even if you get the answer you're kind of thought it was, it doesn't make you feel any better. So what is the actual path towards closure? Well, closure, and what we really need to do when it comes to closure, is we need to express the things underlying those questions. And what I mean by that is you need to allow yourself and stand up for yourself in a way in expressing what you really think and feel about the relationship. When you do this, when you express the deep things underneath and underlying the feelings and the situations that occurred in the relationship, you can also imagine it like closure is this idea of release and relief and letting go. That's really what closure is. It's like, okay, cool. That is boxed up and done. I can put that aside. I no longer have to come back to it. It's when we don't express the feelings and the thoughts that they get stuck inside of us, and that's why we feel like it's not like a finished product that we can put aside. There's something there still that we have to sort of dig into. If you imagine any sort of ghost movie, why do ghosts stay? Because they have unresolved issues or struggles from life, and that's why they stay. At least that's what they say in movies. Right? It's the same idea in relationships and with closure. What we want to do is we want to express the deeper feelings and thoughts and things that we weren't okay with in the relationship. And funny enough, especially for an anxious or an avoidant, it's also a way of standing up for yourself. So let me give you an example of what that might look like. And here's actually a little framework I like to give my clients. So What you can do is you want to state the facts of what happened in the relationship, any facts around situations that brought up strong feelings for you, whether that be negative or whether that be positive. For example, whenever a conversation were to happen or whenever a difficult conversation needed to happen, the avoidant partner moved away and didn't want to have that conversation. And then that left you feeling potentially unheard, unseen, etc. The question version of that would be like, why didn't you ever want to talk to me about things, right? But that's not going to help. Whether we get an answer about that or not, that's not going to help you move forward. What is going to help is you expressing the feelings underneath the fact that they didn't come to you and have difficult conversations. So how that might look is, the fact of the situation is, you didn't come to me and have the difficult conversation when we needed to have the difficult conversation, potentially when I brought it up to you, potentially when I wanted to have it with you. How did that then make you feel? That made me feel unseen, that made me feel unheard, that made me feel unloved, made me feel like I wasn't a priority. Whatever the deeper feelings are for you, that is what needs to come up and to be expressed. Now, last point I'll make on this is, okay, how do we actually then express it to them? Well, there's a couple different ways, because people aren't always going to be willing to receive that kind of feedback. So number one is you can write a letter where you are using that framework. What is the facts of the situation? And then how did that make me feel? And then you write a letter explaining and expressing all of those things. That in itself usually can be quite cathartic, where it lets out and helps you express the emotions underneath everything that was happening within that relationship. And then you can send that letter to them if you want to, or you can burn it, or whatever it is for you. The other version would be to obviously send them a text. That would be if they're more open to receiving that kind of thing from you. And then the third option would be to just send them a voice note. Now, a big important part about this is we're not looking for a response. We are just looking to express and to stand up for what we felt in the relationship. Now, as I said before, this is a two birds with one stone kind of thing. It's going to bring up some closure for you and allow you to express and let go of the stuff inside of you that is making you hold on and feels unresolved. And number two, you're also expressing and standing up for your feelings. Now, when you express and stand up for your feelings, I want you to imagine that you are split in two, and this version looks at you and he or she says, thank you for expressing what I felt. Thank you for standing up for me. Thank you for letting me be heard. And that's the key right there, is we want to feel heard and seen. And that's the point of expressing. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Or let's keep reading. What we really want is the outcome to be different. Yes, obviously. I mean, that's where we get to a more healthy relationship. But that's not necessarily the most important point around, getting answers around the relationship. Going down a rabbit hole of attachment theory will only cause you to further doubt and blame yourself by bringing up what-if scenarios had you recognized their avoidance sooner and taken a different course of action. Not necessarily. So this is where, I disagree with this person. Going down a rabbit hole of attachment theory is extremely beneficial and helpful if you're doing it for the right reasons. So potentially, yes, what he is saying, if you're doing it for the reason to try and figure out your ex so that you can almost like detective your way to finding the answer to why this all happened, that's not helpful. But going into attachment theory is extremely beneficial, not only to understand the other person so that you can realize that potentially it wasn't your fault in the relationship, but also to understand yourself so that you can start working on the important parts of you as an anxious or disorganized so that you can show up in relationships in a more healthy way too. None of that matters now. Their traumas are their own to deal with, just as anxiety is your own cross to bear. Quick side note about this. Just because the name of anxious attachment is anxious attachment doesn't mean an avoidant doesn't feel anxiety. That's actually exactly what comes up in them. They just don't understand it, nor do they sort of deal with it, nor do they recognize it as that. But that is also why they act in the ways they do. They hit their own version of anxiety and stress and worry and doubt when it comes to things that trigger them. So it's actually, you are both dealing with insecurity. It just shows up in different ways and gets triggered by different things, and the behavior of reaction to that is also different. So the second paragraph, I'm going to read it, and then I want to just point out one important thing that I think is good to bring up. This person chose to walk away from you and no longer have you in their life. They continue to wake up every day choosing not to contact you or reconcile. Give them exactly what they want and let them live with the consequences of your absence. You probably did everything you possibly could to save the relationship and they still discarded you. Who cares what their reasons are? Past traumas notwithstanding, most people are capable of rational thought and can recognize when someone is good to them. If that's what tipped them over the edge, then clearly that's not the person for you. They're capable of sustaining meaningful relationships unless they heal. Sadly, most of them don't. One important part here that I really want to bring out is if we are dealing with an actual avoidant, they are not choosing to do this. They don't want to walk away from you. They don't want to leave you. What they ultimately and deeply desire and want is to be close with you, is to be intimate with you, is to have a loving, good connection. But just like an anxious or a disorganized person gets triggered by certain things and brings up their anxiety, same thing happens with an avoidant. The intimacy and the closeness that every human being really wants, just as much as an avoidant wants, is the exact thing that also triggers them. So it becomes very difficult and complicated, where they want the thing so badly, and that's why they keep coming back to you most of the time. But as soon as they get that, as soon as they get the intimacy and the closeness, not only is that in general like uncomfortable for them or brings up their discomfort and anxiety, and that's also why, by the way, they call it discomfort or it feels uncomfortable, is because that's anxiety. They just don't know that, nor do they know how to deal with it because their emotional intelligence is really low. That very thing that they want causes their trigger and then pushes them away. They're not choosing to do that. And unless or until enough partners, for example, tell them they need to work on their shit or things like that, they're not even aware of it. So that's a really important one. And the other important thing I wanted to say here is this person is clearly scorned, as in they're clearly hurt by an avoidant in the past. And that's why in this section, it's very... you can feel their emotion coming out and their own bias coming out because of that. And this is why I wanted to touch on it, because that I completely get it. It sucks being in that situation with an avoidant. I have a client currently who's in the middle of that back and forth right now, and I, not too long ago, had to set a boundary with an avoidant, and it hurts. It does. But to put that into a message in trying to help others when it's that biased is not going to be the most productive. And then the last point I wanted to say is where they said, sadly, most of them don't, as in heal or know how to have a healthy relationship. It is the same with anxious and disorganized, unfortunately. So let's keep reading. And again, I'm going to read this last paragraph and I'm going to consolidate and put a point down. Start showing up for yourself and stop wasting precious time and energy on people who only hurt you or see you as an option. That's the most important step in working towards a secure attachment style and attracting someone you truly deserve. Leave your avoidant in the past where they belong and focus on building a fulfilling life for yourself. I still cry over my avoidant ex long after a breakup, but I know one day she'll be all but a distant memory when I finally healed. Keep going, you can do this. So I like this part, and this is why I say you can see the whole idea is to spread hope and to motivate people, but in the middle there it definitely got a bit biased, and his own emotions of being hurt came up. I agree with this last paragraph. It is important to focus on yourself, show up for yourself, and to leave people who, whether it's their intention or fault or not, who are hurting you, leave them in the past. But why is it important to do that? When you set boundaries with somebody who constantly puts up a wall that blocks you from getting to a healthy relationship, and I want you to imagine this. I want you to imagine your goal is a healthy, loving relationship where you are connected, right? There is a wall that gets in the way, whether it be them not wanting to converse with you, whether it be them leaving every time things get like close and intimate, whatever it is. Again, the important part is that you can recognize that those specific things are not your fault and they are the avoidance stuff to work on. But that doesn't mean the avoidant is choosing to do that, nor is it their intention or wanting to. But here's the important part. Whether it is their intention or not, yes, it is important to move away from that unless they are willing and wanting to work on it. But if they're not, then you are going to constantly hit that wall every single time and feel bad about yourself, feel bad about the relationship. And when you can set your own boundaries and basically decide not to go back, this is why it's so important. Again, remember or imagine you split in two. This part of you is saying, you know what happens down this path. Why do you keep taking me there? Why do you keep allowing me to be hurt? What that does is it builds mistrust in yourself. That person's like, why do you do this to me? Not that person, this half of you. Why do you do this to me? And then that in itself builds insecurity, because definition of insecurity is uncertainty or anxiousness about yourself. If you can't trust yourself, you are uncertain about yourself. And insecurity is a massive part of anxious or disorganized attachment. So in recognizing that the block that is coming up is coming from them, if it is, obviously evaluate and check if there's anything you can do first. If the block is coming from them, then the point and the goal and the gain of setting a boundary and not going down that path every time is that you build self-trust, you build self-confidence, because all of a sudden the other part of you is like, wow, you care about me, you're looking after me, you're not doing the thing that always hurts me. And in doing that, you chip away at that insecurity, because now all of a sudden you're building trust. You're like, no, I got you. You and I, we've got this together. We're gonna make sure that we are looking after ourselves and staying healthy. And that in itself is a huge and important part of the anxious side of anxious attachment or disorganized attachment. Okay, awesome. Let me know what you thought about this video, if this was helpful. If it was, leave a comment. I'll keep doing these. Otherwise, subscribe and let's work on your attachment style together. And as always, keep growing.